Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We'll give everybody just a moment to join our meeting before we get started tonight. Well, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for our virtual author program with New York Times bestselling author Dr. Michael Roizen. Dr. Roizen is joining us tonight to talk to us about his new book, The Great Age Reboot, Cracking the Longevity Code for a Younger Tomorrow. In addition to tonight's program, I do want to mention we have a lot of upcoming programs. We're at our busy season of programming at the Hudson Library, so I would encourage everyone to check out the library's website at hudsonlibrary.org for all of our upcoming programs, many which are virtual. So you can continue to join us just as you are tonight for all of our upcoming programs. Well, I would love to welcome back Dr. Michael Roizen. He was at the library in 2019 when his book, What to Eat When, came out. So we are happy he's with us virtually tonight. He is the the Chief Wellness Officer and the founding chair of the Wellness Institute at the Cleveland Clinic. He is also the chief medical consultant on the Dr. Oz show and has written several New York Times bestsellers, including Real Age and What to Eat When. Copies of The Great Age Reboot will be available for purchase courtesy of the Learned Owl Bookshop in Hudson, and we will have a link in our chat if you would like to purchase your copy this evening. I know Dr. Roizen has a lot that he wants to cover tonight. I know we always welcome participants' questions, but we will get to them if we can at the end, but I'm sure everybody would love to hear more about the Great Age Reboot and of course what we need to do to live a longer, healthier life. So Dr. Roizen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Allison. It's a privilege. And I will make sure there's time for questions. The goal of this is to help you plan for a younger future. The only reason to write a book, in my mind, is because I want to help you understand what is happening in science and the major change that this occurred. So it's to understand why 90 is likely to be the new 40. That is, in 1998, we predicted 60 would be the new 40. That's come to pass. But now you're likely to get a reboot, as we'll get through in a few minutes. And you'll see how likely you are to have a major change. I'm sorry, I didn't anticipate that. It's to adopt behaviors that change outcomes so you will live younger longer. That is, the key point is you're not going to be 90 when you're 90. You're going to function like you're 40. And part of that is planning on how to get there now, although a major change will occur. To educate your associates, friends, and family about the benefits of this. It is a benefit to you, to society, especially if you think about and start to plan for the demographic and economic shifts and for your own shifts. That is, old age won't be old. And so the intended outcome is to give you a head start. As they said, it's based on the book, The Great Age Reboot, Cracking the Longevity Code for Younger Tomorrow. My co-authors are Peter Linneman, who's a emeritus professor of economics at Wharton in Philadelphia, and Albert Ratner, who was the chair of the board and chief executive officer of Forest City Enterprises for over 25 years. We've had a relatively straight line function. Green represents men, blue women. Women always live about 3 years longer. This is life expectancy, and you see it's expanded from about 45 in 1890 to a little over 78 now, in a relatively straight line fashion, initially due to sanitation and public health of children and treatment of childhood diseases, more recently due to management of diseases of the elderly, such as high blood pressure, arterial disease, diabetes, etc. But we're likely to get a 30-year increase in this next decade due to the exponential increases. And I love doing that, so I'm going to do it again. This exponential jump will be due, we expect, to the 30 years, to the exponential research into 14 areas of aging mechanism. You'll see that thus by 2030 or 2035, it will be common for life expectancy, we believe, to be 115, but it won't be the 115 of today. Old age won't be old. I like Peter Diamandis' explanation of exponential research steps. 30 linear steps is 30 yards or 30 meters closer across the room. 30 exponential steps, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, etc., is 26 times around the Earth. That's how fast the research into the mechanism of aging is going. Let me rephrase that again and make sure you understand it, because this is a key point. Until now, we've done research, that is medicine and public health has done research into specific diseases, how to work on high blood pressure or how to work on a heart disease. But now it is research in the basic cause of us getting old, and we're learning so much about it and able to reboot 100-year-old animals back to 40-year-old animals. So each of these 14 areas has done that. That's going to change the rate of dying dramatically because you're going to get to reboot yourself, we believe, with an 80% probability. What does that mean for the individual? Well, if you look at any age, say you're 55 now, and you were expected to live to 74 when you were born, now it's 82. That's that 2.5 years every decade. Well, in fact, it's likely to be 115 by 2030. That means you got 60 more years of life to live. And that means that you don't want to plan on a retirement at 65 and not doing anything for 50 years. You're going to change what you do and how you plan for it. And that's really the reason we wrote the book. The book has 3 parts. The first part goes into the science of these 14 areas, one of which is gene editing. So let me give you a brief tease on what we're going to talk about. So in 25 to 30% of patients with heart failure, they produce an abnormal gene. It's a mutation they develop that leads to heart failure. They have an expected life expectancy. In other words, their heart doesn't squeeze enough blood out. It squeezes about 12% of the blood out that's in the heart at any one time. Means they basically have to sit down because they don't have enough energy to move. But you knock out this gene that causes this abnormal protein, as was done in 7 of the 12 people in Australia that this was first tested in. And instead of living to a life expectancy of 6 months or less, they now have a life expectancy of over 18 years. That's one of the areas of gene editing. Another, the reason we have high LDL cholesterols, the reason we have a risk from cholesterol, is that our liver doesn't metabolize it normally because a lot of us secrete an inhibitor to that metabolic process. Well, if you knock out the gene that makes that inhibitor, you knock out 40% of all deaths in the United States. The first person to receive that in the world was in New Zealand about a month and a half ago. So all of these things are moving into human testing. The people with beta thalassemia secrete an abnormal hemoglobin. It has first been approved for beta thalassemia. They secrete an abnormal hemoglobin, and between age 15 and 20, they have to have a transfusion once a week or so, and they have a life expectancy of 20 to 25. The FDA approved that about 15 days ago, and guess what? They now have a life expectancy of over 65 years without having to have a transfusion every week. This all started really with the Human Genome Project, both at NIH, at the National Institute of Health under Collins, and at Craig Venter in a private area. And they both expected to find 300,000 genes based on the quantity of DNA in our nuclei. In fact, they found only 22,500 genes. What was the majority of the DNA in the nucleus? Well, initially they called it junk DNA. But 7 years later, it was learned that it was really switches called epigenes that controlled if your genes were on or not. All genes do is produce proteins or watch other genes, and whether they're on or not is largely under your control. Let me repeat that. What they really learned is that 80% of the genes, whether they're on or not, is under your control by the time you're 30. For example, doing stress management, doing other things, changes which genes are on or not, which changes which proteins you have in your body or not. So let me give you an example. All genes do, as I said, is make proteins or watch other genes. Which genes are on or off? It's largely under your control. When you stress your muscles, for example, that turns on a gene that produces the small protein resin. Resin gets across the blood-brain barrier, goes to your brain, and turns on another gene that increases brain-derived neurotrophic growth factor, otherwise known as Miracle-Gro for your brain. That increases your hippocampus size. There's only one organ in the body where size matters, and it's your hippocampus, because if you have a big hippocampus, you don't develop dementia or memory failure as you get older to a huge degree. So when you exercise, you're increasing your hippocampal size, and that means you are a genetic engineer for you. That's the basics. And remember, I said 80% of the time you get to control it. The other 20%, like the beta thalassemia gene or like the gene for heart failure, we're learning how to control other ways. And it's coming fast. We're learning how to do this fast enough that beta thalassemia is now essentially a curable disease. Now, when I say that, you got to say, what do you mean the other 20%? Well, some of those, as we'll get to in a few minutes, are responsible for you being young or old. You still have the genes that you had when you were age 20. No one took them away from you. The settings on them may be a little different than they were when 20. And the question that aging researchers have asked is, can we reset them to age 20 or age 40? And the answer, at least in animal models, is yes. And we know how to do it inexpensively. That means that when you get to be 90, maybe, if the animal data pertains to humans, and we're learning early on that it may, you're going to be able to be 40 again. Really, what causes our disability now in aging is genes that should be on are turned off, or vice versa, or cells are lost, or the cells malfunction. And what's happening is we're learning how to change which genes are on or off, or to replace those cells. And if the cells malfunction, we're learning how to hack them so they function the original way. That's what is happening, and that's why we think with an 80% probability, you're going to get to live much longer, younger. Let me give you another example. So Cleveland Clinic researchers looked at all the drugs that had been approved by the FDA that were now generic. And sildenafil, which is also known as Viagra, it's a therapy for erectile dysfunction in men and pulmonary hypertension in women, blocked the attachment of amyloid and tau protein to brain cells and the cells supporting the brain. They then looked at a 15 million person database and found that the people who were taking Viagra as opposed to Cialis had a 69% reduction in dementia risk. Similar work was done at the Gladstone in California at UC San Francisco, University of California, San Francisco, and they found that a simple water pill, bumetanide, related, in fact, in mice, it prevented 70% of the dementia. They then looked at a 12 million person database, and it prevented 70% of dementia. How expensive, you say, is bumetanide? It's $4 a month, generic now. In fact, this is now, because both of these were retrospective analyses, they're now happening in prospective randomized studies, bumetanide alone, Viagra alone, and then the two together to see if they can block dementia in humans, as well as it did retrospectively. That's called proteostasis. They're looking at the compounds that affect abnormal proteins that cause these diseases. That's why we think that, in fact, this is very likely, because I love doing this, there are 14 areas that have this exponential increase in aging, or in, if you will, life expectancy, healthy life expectancy in animals. And remember, it's not that old will be old, it's that your period between 30 and 60 will be extended to 30 to 90. So a 90-year-old will function like a 40-year-old, we think. Now you say, well, I just heard that the COVID decreased life expectancy. Yes, and so did the Spanish flu in the 1910 to 20 period. But you don't even see a blip here. What really happened in 1917 to 18, there was a drop in 12 years of life expectancy. But within 1 year, it was back on trend as an increase. What does that mean? It really meant, if you will, that the calculation of life expectancy by what we call period life expectancy, it means that the way they report it, they assume that COVID-19 will kill everyone for the rest of your life at the same rate it did last year. It won't. And the Spanish flu didn't. And that's why when you look at that graph, you can't even see, when you look at this, you don't even see a blip here. And I'll bet in 30 years, we won't even see a blip here. So let's talk about some of the 14 areas. One of those is what we call senolytics. An old cell makes its neighboring cells old. You say, why did it do that? Well, if you were attacked by an animal with a horn and that punctured you, you want your cells to send out a signal, form a scab. Now, a scab, in order to do that, the injured cell has to signal all those cells around it, don't act like your normal cells, form the scab, please. And that the problem with that is, if you form a scab in your knee, that's osteoarthritis, and it makes you feel pain. It's a dysfunctional solution now, whereas it was a very logical solution when we evolved it 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. So the field of senolytics really started with the convoys at University of California, San Francisco in 1967, when they found that injecting young blood into an old rat made that old rat young. In fact, what happened is they then spent the next 50 years trying to find out what was it in that young blood that caused the old rat to become young. Well, it wasn't that. What they found recently was that it was getting rid of the old cells and old proteins in blood. So Senolytics has now turned to you donating a unit of blood, the blood gets washed, you getting the blood back, but the proteins you have to make again. That is, you get the red cells back, but you don't get any of the protein in the blood back again. Instead, you get salt water. In animals, this makes the skin young. It makes the muscles young. Biopsies of kidney, liver, pancreas all look like an animal that is much younger than the one they were working on. And your cardiovascular function normalizes. And now in a randomized controlled trial in humans, where you donate a unit of blood, you get the red cells back after being washed, you throw away the plasma and you get either fresh albumin or just saline. What happens? Well, in this study of randomized controlled trial called AMBAR, so it's known as the name AMBAR, it reverses. If you look here, this is mild Alzheimer's disease, and this is a measure of cognitive function. And you see they donated blood in the early part. They then didn't do anything after a while, but their cognitive function kept getting better and better and better. They reversed each of the 12 areas they studied over the 15-month period. And one of the benefits of COVID-19 is we've developed better vaccines. Well, the way an old cell signals to the cells around it to form a scab or to stop functioning in their normal way is they send out a protein which tells the cells around it, hey, form a scab. But in mice, you can get a vaccine against that protein, knock out those cells, and the mouse becomes much younger. So maybe we'll get a vaccine to get rid of senolytic cells. Another area is autophagy, which is recycling old cells into young cells. You have 5 days of 750 calories a day, once every 3 months, with low on protein, low on sugar, 750 calories. And we have in the book the recipe for that. It's essentially a tomato soup you're eating for 5 days. When you do that, you reset every one of your markers of aging back a number of years. Gene editing, we've already talked about. When you develop stem cells, one of the things you have to do is regenerate them, because we only have so many stem cells in our body. That is, we are born with a set number of stem cells. Each one of them can make 70 to 140 duplications of themselves, and then they stop functioning. Well, stem cells are the matriarchs. Not only do they go from one stem cell to any organ type, but they repair things. So when you have a heart attack, why you want to get to a hospital fast is, one, to open up the blood flow, and that saves some of the cells around it, but it also lets the stem cells come in. So you'll often find a heart attack person who has a very low ejection fraction. They're not admitting putting out much blood, 20 or 30%, the day after their heart attack. But by 6 months later, if they've gotten their stem cells to come in, then their ejection fraction is back to where it was, and their heart's pumping well again. In this case, they gave novel hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And what does that do? Well, you go to 2 atmospheres down to 1, 2 to 1, 2 to 1. But a half an atmosphere of oxygen, half of what you're normally used to, meaning an oxygen level that you'd have of 60 or so, stimulates stem cell production. It's as though the body says, hey, we're going to get injury, let's produce more stem cells. But going from 2 to 1, 2 to 1, 2 to 1 does the same thing, but without the risk of injury. So your body senses you're going from 2 to 1 is like going from 1 to 0.5, but it isn't. You're not at risk like you would be at 0.5. And in this study of strokes, you see it improved cognitive functioning by 75 or 85%. Huge, huge benefits. And in addition, it made every other organ in the body young, including the skin. This is elastin and collagen fibers became much younger again. Another one we've talked about already, proteostasis, with the Viagra or the Bumex blocking abnormal proteins attaching to brain cells and glial cell support structure. This is one of my favorites. It's actually the favorite of my co-author, Albert Ratner. When you're young, you have brown fat. What is brown fat? It is metabolically very active fat. It's got a lot of mitochondria in it, and it creates heat. Why do we have it? Well, it keeps your organs warm when your mother isn't swaddling you. In the elderly, from that mother fat that goes to brown fat, we also can get white fat. White fat creates inflammation, and that leads to heart disease, stroke, memory loss, cancer, and dementia, as well as arthritis, etc. So imagine you taking white fat, regressing it to mother fat, and then turning it into brown fat. That's now been done in 3 animal species. I understand the human trials are starting with that in China, actually. We know it works in sheep. Clemson did it. You'd say, why would the University Clemson do that? Because they have an agriculture group with them. And it turns out the sheep don't stop eating either. They get fat, and they had developed non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, just like we humans do, and die from that. And thus the sheep herder or the sheep owners can't get wool. The animal dies. So this was a way of seeing, could we get it so the sheep can eat all the grass they want or hay or whatever they eat and not develop fatty liver disease. Another favorite is what we call epigenetic reprogramming. I alluded to that before. You have, as you go through life, you develop damage to both your genes and your epigenes. But a scientist from Japan, Yamanaka, found that if you turn these 4 genes on, you repair all that damage. And the old mice become young mice and live about 50% longer. And the old mice, when you biopsy muscle or pancreas, they have young muscle and pancreas. The problem with this is actually done, and you turn 110-week-old mice into 40-week-old mice, the equivalent of a 100-year-old human into a 37 or 35-year-old human. The problem is 2 years later, in human terms, these mice develop cancer. But 3 groups have now eliminated the C. mic, and without C. mic, the animal becomes young and doesn't develop cancer. Now, it's only been 41 weeks since the first of these groups of mice have had only the 3 genes turned on. But, so we don't know how many times you can do this, but these mice literally go from 110-week-old to 40-week-old. Now, and you see, they look old, they look young. Their organs look old, their organs get young. This has been done by 3 separate groups now, a group at UC Davis, a group in Switzerland, and now the Coleco group, the Google Moonshot group on aging, has done this as well. And now a 4th group has done it in beagles. That's the group at MIT and Harvard has taken male 17-year-old beagles and made them 3-year-old puppies. They retain all their intelligence, so they still recognize their owners. They still know how to you go to the bathroom outside instead of inside, etc. But they're puppies. They're play with me puppies again. So a lot of this is moving very quickly. And as I said, by 18, you control the choices. This is one of my favorite studies. It was done by Dean Ornish and Pete Carroll. It's on 52 guys with prostate cancer. And this is, this is the strips of genes, 52 strips of genes up and down, and the same 52 guys a year later. It's called a heat map because they're red when the genes are on. What these genes are on, they got turned off over that year. How did they do it? They eliminated the 3 guys who smoked, eliminated tobacco. They eliminated 5 foods from their diet. They walked 10,000 steps a day, and they meditated 15 minutes a morning and night. What are these genes that these 5 that they turned off? Those are the RAS family of genes that promote the growth of breast, colon, and prostate cancer. So women, it's the same for women as it is for men. Up here where they're off and these genes get turned on are producing these two genes produce the GSTM1 protein that causes prostate, breast, and colon cancer to commit suicide. It's now 14 years later than the study started, and only 1 of these 52 men have progressed beyond this treatment for their prostate cancer, as opposed to 31 in the comparison group. So 5 tips for you to understand: change your attitude. You are a genetic engineer for you. 2, and by the way, if you look at for your brain, there are 33 things you can do that have been shown in at least 2 studies to keep your brain young. I'm going to go over 2 of them: physical activity and speed of processing games. So the speed of processing games, you hit the click and either the car or truck will be behind here. You have to identify whether it's a car or truck, and then someplace in the periphery, the Route 66 sign will appear. You have to identify it. If you get it right, the time, 500 milliseconds, moves to a shorter time. You get it wrong, you get more time. So it trains you to do speed of processing, and you'll get faster and faster. But what that means is actually, in these studies, your hippocampus expands. And for those who did just 18 hours of this over a 10-year period, starting at age 73, I think you should start earlier. But if you start at age 73 and do just 2 hours a year of speed of processing games, you get reduction of dementia over 40%. How about speed in moving your body? Well, this is the same thing, looking at hippocampal size, and you see just 3 months of physical activity 3 times a week for an hour increased this guy's hippocampus, seen on the lateral and frontal x-rays, before A and B, C and D after, by 22%. Pretty impressive. See if I can go to the next slide. I don't know what I did here. I am somewhat frozen. I'm going to escape for a second. There we go. Okay. So we say that 10,000 steps a day, 30 minutes of exercise a week, cardio 20 minutes 3 times a week, and 40 jumps a day are ideal for health benefit, but you get more than 50% of it with just walking. And you say, where'd 10,000 steps come from? Well, it came from a Japanese pedometer maker who was trying to sell pedometers, but he guessed right. This is the 10,000 steps. Sure, 6,000 is better than 4, and 8 is better than 6, but 10 is where the ideal is. And it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter your ethnicity, it's 10,000 steps a day. That's also the number that stops chronic disease, diabetes, ischemic heart disease, stroke, colon, and breast cancer. It doesn't matter whether you got prediabetes or diabetes, it's 10,000, as you see, is the lowest point of all-cause mortality. And I'm just going to say it is, for dementia, again, it is 10,000, which combines to be about 4,000 that you do casually in a day, and then about 6,000 that you do purposefully, gets you to that 10,000 level. And remember, all genes do is make proteins. When you walk fast, you turn on that gene that expands your brain, that helps you maintain your memory. You're a genetic engineer for you. So change your attitude. You are a genetic engineer for you. The second point is you want to do things that love you and that you love. So food is a relationship. Everything here is a relationship. You wouldn't marry someone who's trying to kill you. You shouldn't eat food that's trying to kill you every day. So you may love French fries, but they're trying to kill you. The goal is, I love salmon, I love avocados. They love me back, and they will love you back. You'll need a team, both a team for finance and a team for medicine. None of us would try and do a colonoscopy on ourselves. So your team has to include both your primary care practitioner, plus someone looking after your eyes, and someone looking after your teeth, and someone looking after your skin to help you, guide you. And then, as I said, add speed to body and brain, manage stress, including cultivating your posse and your purpose. So that's why we think that those 14 areas are why we think you're going to get an exponential jump. Now, the first part of the book is all about the science. The second third of the book is about the economics and what happens. And obviously, if you're going to live 30 years longer, you're going to work 20 years longer. And what that does is it's a huge jump in the gross domestic product for the United States, and it saves Medicare and Medicaid. That's the middle part of the book, both what has to be done from a policy standpoint and what you can do to prepare for it, and the benefits of compounding for finance. The third part of the book is on personal decisions that you can make now. For example, those 33 things that have been shown to keep your brain younger, well, we go through those in that third part of the book, so you'll know what to do now. I'm going to, at this time, say, if you will, just to give you our website. You can ask me questions. If you don't get a chance here, we have about 20 minutes left that we save for questions, so I'm going to take them. But you can go to greatagereboot.com and ask me questions. We also have a companion app called Reboot Your Age at that site, so you can get that. and it'll guide you personally on how to stay young. But that's those 3 sections: the science and why it's likely and what the whiz-bang science is, 2, what you should do financially and what the policies of a country need to be financially to make this really a boom time in the future for America and the world, and to decrease income inequality. And the 3rd component is what you can personally do in both health and finances to prepare for this so you will benefit from it. Thank you very much. And Allison, I'm willing to, let's see if I can stop the share here. I'm happy to ask questions.
Yeah, we have a couple questions coming in. Let's see.
So you see, I did leave time for questions.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm sure our audience would love to ask you a couple things. One thing I will say while I'm looking through the questions real quick here, I finished your book yesterday, and one thing I really appreciated about your writing style is that you made it very approachable for someone that's non-medical. I'm not in this, I'm a librarian, I'm not in the science field, but everything that you talked about, I thought you really made it approachable for the everyday reader to understand what you were trying to share, because you do have some very technical information in the beginning of your book, but I just want to say thank you for putting it in a way that we can understand what it is that you're trying to get across to our audience here tonight.
I appreciate it. Let me tell you, I really appreciate that comment, but that's really what I try and do. We try and do very hard. The first writing of the book goes through, I think this book went through 26 or 27 editions.
Wow.
So the first 3 or 4 to get the science right, and then we spend a lot of time to make it, as you said, accessible to normal people. So that, and that's the majority of the work in writing the book, is exactly doing that.
Okay. One of our attendees asked if you can share your screen for the 5 tips for living a little longer. Are you able to go back to that?
Yep, I will be glad to. It's here. There it is.
Okay, this question kind of goes with your. Stephanie asked you personally, Dr. Roizen, if you eat grass-fed meat and how much?
The answer is no. The problem with red meat isn't the meat. It is the carnitine, lecithin, and choline. It's not, it is carnitine, lecithin, and choline. Carnitine is in red meat. Changes the genes, which genes are on in the bacteria in your gut. So this is a complex thing. I'm going to take this off because it's such a complex thing. I'm going to try and do this. So what happens is when you eat meat, your gut breaks that down into the amino acids. And carnitine, lecithin, and choline, when eaten at the same time as saturated fat, so you have to eat the 2. If you just took carnitine pills or lecithin pills, it doesn't do it unless you take it with saturated fat. But when you take those 2 together, you change which genes are on in the bacteria inside your gut. And it turns on genes that make inflammatory proteins that you then absorb, and that creates inflammation in you. So the problem with grass-fed meat is it has carnitine with it, and it has saturated fat with it, which turns on the, if you will, genes in the bacteria inside you to make an inflammatory protein that you absorb and that makes heart disease, stroke, memory loss, impotence, wrinkling of the skin, cancer, and dementia much more common. In fact, 3 4-ounce portions of red meat a week is the equivalent of a LDL cholesterol of 250 or of smoking a pack a day of cigarettes. That's how inflammatory your body gets from 3 4-ounce portions of red meat or 3 egg yolks a week.
Wow. One of our patrons.
And we didn't know the mechanism. If you look way back in 1998 when we wrote Real Age, we knew that red meat and processed red meat increased cancer, increased dementia, increased heart disease, but it wasn't the cholesterol elevation. We knew that back then. You can look in that book. Hopefully your library has a couple copies of Real Age. You can look way back then. The science hasn't changed. We didn't know what it was then. We didn't know what it was then, but we now know it is that you change which genes are on in the bacteria inside you.
Okay, one of our patrons asked, when will gene editing be available as a treatment for the general population?
I don't know. It's clearly within 10 years. It's available now for people with serious disease such as beta thalassemia. It's beginning to be available in phase 3 trials for sickle cell disease. When it's available for routine diseases, like knocking out the gene that increases your risk of heart disease or stroke, that increases LDL cholesterol, we expect sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, probably close to 5 years, but at least within the 10-year period. So the point is, and that's why we wrote the last third of the book, you've got to do things to keep you ready so you will be able to benefit. And by the way, when you say with gene editing of thalassemia, the charge is now 1.2 million per treatment. All you require is one treatment in your life. What do the ingredients cost? $5. So it will have to come down in price, that. But some of the things we know now already, plasma exchange, we pay people to do it. So it's not very expensive. Bumetanide, $4 a month. So there are a lot of things that are inexpensive here too. And the gene editing is really inexpensive in the ingredients. It's a matter of we've got to get some of the greed away from some of the pharmaceutical firms.
This was an interesting question from one of our patrons. Catherine asked, if the researchers do increase human longevity, what will we likely die of when we're in our 90s or hundreds? If we're eliminating diseases and all that.
Well, we don't know how many times you can do this. So we, as I said, the mice that have been rebooted are only in their, I think, their 42nd week of rebooting. So they're only, quote, 82 weeks old in their second time, or I think they're 149 weeks old now. Clearly, people will die of unforced errors, texting while driving, smoking. People will do what we call stupid ass things and kill themselves accidentally. And so that will be one of the major problems. It's like playing football without a helmet. It's going to be one of the major things. We think unforced errors are a major problem going forward. But we don't know whether you're going to get a second reboot. We only know one. And the good news is those people function younger. So just imagine you're 65, but you're functioning like a 30-year-old. What will you decide to do? Well, you're going to decide, am I in the career I want? How do I save enough money? How do we compound enough money so I'm going to be able to retire my second time around when I'm 95? There's some, as you know, we do some calculations in the book, And if you just put a 3% of a $15 per hour income away at 4% per year, if you will, and it compounds as is mandated in Australia, Denmark, and Singapore. It's in addition to Social Security and Medicare, and you put it away. If you don't touch it till age 65, it's $250,000. But if you don't touch it to 95, it's 1.4 million in today's dollars. And if you have a company like the Cleveland Clinic, and I imagine the Hudson Library that matches it, you end up with 2.8 million by 95. And that, if we do that right, it will get rid of income inequality. Surprising to us, in January and February this year, the House of Representatives took up such a bill and passed in a bipartisan fashion, something like 420 to 12. So it's now in front of the Senate. So we may have that as a law in the United States, which really goes away, it does a huge amount to take away the worry of getting old and take away a lot of wealth inequality.
This is kind of just a general question. What are some of the best things that a person with dementia can do to alleviate or reverse the symptoms?
If I had early dementia, I'd sign up for the second AMBAR study immediately. It will be done. Babak Tusi at the Cleveland Clinic, I think his last name is spelled Tousi, is one of the principal investigators. He was in the first program. That showed a reversal of dementia. As I said, it's now going to be a second study with 100 sites and 3,000 patients, and I would sign up for that as fast as I could get enrolled in it. If I couldn't sign up for it, I would then find a plasma donation center and I'd start doing it on my own, donating plasma. And I would also start, see if I could do speed of processing games, and I would start to add speed to my physical activity as much as I could. If I can't do it on my own, I get a bike that forces me to do it. That is a mechanical bike that forces me to go fast.
A quick question from Matt. He asked, I think this was in regards to just some daily activities that you can do to increase your physical activity. What does jump 40 times a day mean? He wanted to know what kind of type of jumping are you talking about?
It is jumping on a hard surface. That's the way it's described. In other words, whether you're doing jumping jacks or jump rope, but it has to be on a hard surface. It's to jar your bones. It's the only thing we know that Bill puts bone onto, the only lifestyle treatment we know that puts bone onto your bone. Resistance exercise helps you not lose bone, but jumping actually apparently causes little tears and stimulates the osteoblasts to repair it, your cells in your bone that will repair and build bone. And so it builds bone, and it also is the only thing we know that lubricates spine. So it's beneficial. And I want to say what I said before, none of this should be done without checking with your practitioner. So there are people whom jumping is no good, or there are people who might not even be able to walk, or there are people who shouldn't take some of the, if you will, supplements or small molecules we recommend. But in general, almost everyone can do all of these things, but do check with the practitioner, your practitioner, before you try any of them.
We have time for one more. We talked just really briefly about egg yolks. She's asking, why are egg yolks bad? Is it of course the cholesterol, but is there a reason why?
The cholesterol isn't the cholesterol is not the evil. The cholesterol is kind of a byproduct. The evil is the choline plus saturated fat changes the genes in the bacteria you have inside you to produce an inflammatory protein. Why does it do this? We don't know. Does it do it in everyone? No, it does it in about 82% of Americans tested. So it's not 100%. You can get a TMAO. We go through it in the book. TMAO level, trimethylamine oxide level, and see if you're one of the 82% or one of the 18% and can enjoy eggs. But in the vast majority of people, egg yolks change the genes, which genes are on or not in the bacteria inside you. And in the 82%, it turns on a gene that makes an inflammatory protein that you absorb that then causes you heart disease, stroke, memory loss, impotence, wrinkling of the skin, and dementia, as well as arthritis.
Great. Well, thank you so much for our audience questions. And then you said if anyone had any questions, they can contact you on the website.
Yeah, I'll put that up again just
Okay.
so people can see it. Let's see if I can get to it. Oops. There it is. So it's greatagereboot.com. You can go there and there's a question place. If you want to email us, it's questions@greatagereboot.com. And the app is Reboot Your Age, is the companion app.
Great. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Sharing.
And Allison, we made it by
8 minutes. Thank you so much. I know you had a lot would love to hear more about your book, but of course we want them to read your book, The Great Age Reboot, available of course at the Hudson Library, but we also have it available if you'd purchase your copy through the Learn It Owl bookshop, and there should be a link in the chat if you would like to purchase your copy this evening. So thank you all for joining us, and Dr. Roizen, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Thank you all for staying with it too.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.
You too.